Hello, this is Pastor Manning bringing you the Beacon of Hope podcast from Lighthouse Baptist Church at 2032 Cedar Hill Road. As I begin this podcast, may I recommend to you that you go and sometime listen to episode 41 entitled Soil Preparedness and Cultivation. That is a very, very helpful, it's actually a message from a Sunday morning here at Lighthouse Baptist, and it is a message which has helped and brought to serious and sober reflection and action many of our people. Many have commented on it and specifics in how it dealt with them. I recommend it to you. That's episode 41. Look that up in our podcast series, and you'll find it to be very helpful. Today, I have an interesting thought, but a brief one, but just interesting, powerful in the thought itself. What actually triggered the thought was these scriptures out of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. It says in verses 1 and 2, "Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our gathering together unto him, that you be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand." Now, when I read that, I understand the doctrine and how those verses fit, but the little phrase, "be not soon shaken in mind," that jumped out at me. And so I'd like to just give you a quick thought about not soon shaken. I've always been interested in seismology, the study of earthquakes and movements of the earth. It's just fascinated me since I was young. It was quite a few years until I found out that one of the most powerful series of earthquakes that ever happened actually in the Mississippi River Valley, and the fallout from it, or the earth, the vibrations from it, and the earth movement from it extended all the way up through the Ohio Valley and all the way up into London, Ontario, Canada. The epicenter was around New Madrid, Missouri. Now that's a pretty well-known thing. It wasn't that many years ago that it wasn't. I have at my side, while I'm making this podcast, a book which my wife acquired for me, I believe for Christmas, or I think it was, and maybe my birthday, but it was back in 2007. The title of this book is "The Earthquake America Forgot: 2,000 Temblors in 5 months." It gives, on the cover of the particular edition I have, the Mississippi River ran backwards. 5 whole towns disappeared. People were swallowed alive. And I could give you fascinating fact after fact from this book. I've read it more than once. It was written by Dr. David Stewart and Dr. Ray Knox. I've had the privilege of talking to Dr. Stewart on the phone a couple of times, and he doesn't know me, but my wife had asked to get an autographed copy, and he'd autographed this book, and he and I have spoken since then. But it's amazing the power of an earthquake. And when I read that verse, "be not soon shaken in mind," and of course it's talking about Christian people not being overwhelmed when there's a falling away, when we see things headed in a dangerous and perilous condition, leading up to the time of Christ's return. And it's admonishing in us not to be soon shaken in our mind, not to be taken over by the spirit of fear, going into panic mode, because we believe that the Lord's coming back. And so with this in mind, and what it was talking about, those words, "be not soon shaken," brought to my mind some of the things I've read and studied over the years, different documents, different things I've read regarding things that are shaken. And here's what jumped out at me. When it comes to earthquakes, and when it comes to susceptibility to the shaking that comes with them, there are 2 types of structures that are highly susceptible to earthquakes. Number 1 are weak structures. They found in the San Francisco earthquake in the early 1900s, what happened there, I believe it was 1906, the San Francisco earthquake, there were some of the buildings that collapsed and revealed that some of the contractors of that day had built buildings and had not built them according to the code, had used weak mortar, had not reinforced things, had masonry walls with no reinforcement within them. A lot of different things where contractors had not done what they were supposed to do and had not done the work to the level to which they were being paid to do it. And the end result were devastating collapses and loss of life. So weak structure that's not built according to specification, that's not built according to what it takes to withstand the trials, in this case earthquake, which is going to come. Obviously, San Francisco is a seismically active area and prone to great seismic events. But these contractors had ignored that for their own personal gain, and in so doing had allowed people to be injured, to people to die, and there to be great financial loss. I wonder how many times we allow the structure of our life to be weak. We don't put in time in prayer. We don't take time to learn the Bible. Don't take time to exercise spiritual discipline. And so when something comes that shakes, when something comes that induces fear, then what happens? Structure falls apart. It's exactly what Jesus taught, the difference between building on sand and building on rock. In fact, down around the Marina District, which, by the way, had problems in the Northridge earthquake too in the 90s, but around the Marina District, as they called it, in San Francisco, dirt had been pushed out into the bay, and then houses built on that land where they had tried to take back land from the water and then build on top of it. That's not solid ground. And there was a process that happened during that earthquake that's called liquefaction. It happens sometimes during the large earthquakes in Mexico City, and I believe it was in the 1980s when they had the major earthquake there, and there were entire apartment complexes that tipped over like dominoes. Why? Because of liquefaction. If that's not a solid soil, and Mexico City is built on an old, huge lake bed, and it's actually the entire city because of the aquifer being pumped out with the occupants of that city, it's gradually sinking. And so it's very, very dangerous there in earthquake because the soil will actually turn like quicksand, and buildings can sink down into it. They'll tip, they'll collapse, they'll break. That's what ends up happening. Weak structures. When we do not prepare for trouble in our lives, when we do not walk circumspectly day by day, and we have no ongoing fellowship with the Lord, then we are a weak structure. Then, the other kind of structure that is very susceptible to destruction are rigid structures. It's interesting, in Tokyo, which is a horribly seismically active place and a massively populated city, and they have many, many skyscrapers. But much of the building there in Tokyo is done on a level unparalleled anywhere else in the world. One of the items they use in Tokyo is the building of where they build the buildings are actually sitting on massive blocks of lead. This is way underground, and the lead is between the bedrock where the piers coming down for the support for these massive buildings and all that come down. And there's lead. They're setting on lead. Well, lead, of course, has a very low melting temperature, and friction produces heat. The more pressure there is on something, when movement is applied, the more friction there is and the more heat. To experiment with this, take your hand and run it lightly across carpet a few times. Won't bother you, but put some real pressure down and drag it at the same speed, you can get rug burned that way pretty fast. That's because you're combining downward pressure and movement. It's producing friction, which produces heat. Well, these huge, massive blocks of lead, what happens if the ground moves, seismic activity vibrates, whatever type of intensity and whatever type of frequency of the vibration is coming through, according to what type of earthquake it is, when it hits that area, there's movement, and the massive, almost incomprehensible weight of that building on that lead, when there's just that movement of the ground, the lead liquefies, and basically the building floats on a bed of liquid lead that, as soon as the shaking ends, solidifies again, and the building remains stable. So basically, it turns into a liquid shock absorber during times of seismic movement, and then becomes solid again. That's ingenious, also very effective. But may I come back to the point of telling you what one of the most dangerous type of structures is during an earthquake, and that's a structure that is very rigid. Because when you get a man-made structure that's very rigid, think of a classic masonry building, especially one that has no internal reinforcements. When you have a rigid building that man has built, and you have almost incalculable energy hitting it from an earthquake that man has no power over, invariably, those buildings which do not either have the capacity to sway or the capacity to absorb shock, the buildings which are rigid, they will shatter and they will bring death and economic loss. It's the same way in people's lives. Now, I'm not talking by rigid, because I understand the mindset of people today is warped. I'm not talking about people who believe there is right and there's wrong. That's not rigid. That's truth. I'm not talking about people who believe that there are thou shalt and thou shalt not in the Bible, and that it is valid in this New Testament time. Those people are not rigid. Those people are called Bible believers. See, Jesus said that he left some commandments. Maybe there ought to be some people look up the word commandment and find out that it is not the word suggestion. The first clue that it isn't is they're spelled differently. So someone who believes there are boundaries, someone believes there is right and wrong, someone who believes there are commandments, someone who believes there are things that are true and there are things that are false, that person is not rigid. That person is settled in truth. Rigid is when someone cannot adapt their life. I'm not talking about compromising truth, but they cannot adapt their life to circumstances that change. I'm not being unkind in this at all. I am not heartless in my next statement. But someone who loses a loved one to death. Now, here's the thing about it. If that loved one's saved, you didn't lose them to death. You lost their shell. And I understand the pain of it. I'm 55 years old at this recording, so obviously I've had people I love very dearly pass. But when someone is rigid, they say, my world is gone. Why? Because they cannot adapt to the fact that this life is just temporary. Someone who is rigid, they lose their job and they just fall apart. Why? Because they cannot adapt the truths they know to a changing situation. Someone who is rigid, when someone that they maybe admired or respected, or someone who had taught them some things, goes astray, they just come unglued. They just fall apart. They shatter. Why? Because they cannot adapt truth. The fact that that person, and let's say someone who had taught them truths, and maybe even someone who had been instrumental either in their salvation or in their growth in grace, they cannot adapt to the fact that that person, what that person taught them, and the truth that person put into them is still valid, even though that person has went a different way. This is what I mean by being rigid. People who have to have something done a certain way, and it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's not a matter of Bible principle. It's just, this is it, and if anything's different than this, then they cannot adapt to it. God does not want us to be weak. Neither does he want us to be rigid. What he wants us to do is have the strength to allow the principles, the precepts, the truths, the commandments that he gives us to guide us and be our staying point, to be our strength and be our stability in a ever-changing and rapidly decaying world. In other words, he wants us not to be soon shaken in mind. Why? Because we know the Lord's coming back. And thank God he will one day, and all things will be put right. Just some interesting thoughts for you. I hope you have a great day, and thank you for listening to the Beacon of Hope podcast.